Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Mark Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Mark helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Mark draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Mark Bautis. On today's show, I brought on Kelly Moylan. Kelly's a licensed psychotherapist who specializes in treating adults and adolescents experiencing anxiety, depression, work and relationship issues. She's been a practicing clinician for 25 years and has had her private practice for more than 12 years. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. I'm excited to talk about today's topic, stress, and particularly stress and anxiety that people have about their money with everything that's gone on in the past year and a half. And when you throw money stress on top of a pandemic, it can definitely be really troubling from a lot of people.
It really, really can. I think that financial stress is one of the more intense stresses that people feel. I think when people feel financially insecure or feel financial stress, they're more likely to panic than with other forms of stress, relationship stress or family problems, or there's something about financial stress that pushes an urgency and a panic button for a lot of people. And I also find that just in a more general way, when you sort of layering financial stress on the pandemic, is that one of the stressors of the pandemic that is really challenging is that it's left us feeling like our day-to-day is so unknown and so out of our control. And over the years in my practice, I have come to believe that the two hardest things for human beings are loss and the unknown. We don't want to lose money, people, relationships, things, experiences, and we want to know what's going to happen. So the combination of the pandemic leading to financial stress for a lot of people, or if people were financially distressed before the pandemic began, has really multiplied and exacerbated a lot of stress.
Yeah. And, I'm seeing it on my side a lot from the people I talk about. And, to some extent, everyone thinks about money, thinks about their finances. But at what point does that thinking about it or, become a concern that transforms into stress, anxiety, to the point where they should seek out help from someone like you?
It's probably a little bit different for everyone. I think that if someone is at a point where they're either feeling like their financial situation is out of control in some way, like that they're in debt or that they're having difficulty with employment or overspending, or, obviously there are a million different financial problems we could name. If that problem seems to be all consuming, they can't think about anything else. They can't get their hands around it. They can't figure out how to cope with it. That's a good time to seek help. I think sometimes people become, like I said, incredibly anxious and incredibly, even to the point of panic about money. And if you're feeling like you're obsessed and you can't think about anything else, that's not necessarily going to lead you to improve your financial situation, right? At that point, then your anxiety or difficulty managing your financial situation has become a problem unto itself, and it has become an emotional problem that if you get help with that emotional problem, it's going to give you some perspective and hopefully some relief from the emotions that will make it easier to make financial decisions, choices, behaviors that will improve your financial situation.
So how does someone, so let's say someone does obsess about it to the point where they do realize, okay, maybe it makes sense to get some help. They reach out to you. Where do you start with them? What does an engagement look like?
Usually someone either gets my number or gets my email through someone else, or a lot of people actually find therapists and come to me through Psychology Today. Psychology Today is a magazine that is, quite frankly, not the most impressive magazine with regard to how it writes about psychology. It's not, it's definitely it's a sort of a layperson's approach to psychology in the articles, but sometimes there are helpful, there's helpful information in there, but it's not a hard-hitting psychological journal per se. However, Psychology Today maintains a website and a network of therapists, and a lot of people use Psychology Today to find therapists in their area, and most therapists that I know have profiles on Psychology Today. And so you can see a picture of the person, you can read something about the person, you can search for a therapist without having to meet a bunch, go to a bunch of sessions and meet a bunch of different people before you find the right person.
Sure.
So how people get referred to me is, varies. But once someone's referred to me and we have an initial session, what I like to do is just listen, to find out, let the person tell me why they're there, and what's bothering them, what they'd like to be different in their lives, what they've tried that hasn't worked, that's led them to be seeking help because they feel like they can't do it on their own. And then usually asking also some clinical questions to understand the depth of the symptomatology, because sometimes if the main stressor in your life is financially related, it could lead to clinical depression. It could lead to clinical anxiety that needs a different level of treatment than just problem solving about the behaviors and the circumstances of what they're in. So I do a lot of listening and I ask a lot of questions. Everyone's life is very full and complex. And so your primary problem that may bring you to therapy is connected to everything else in your life, so understanding how your finances may be affecting your family, your relationships, your own mental health. And then, after a few sessions, it can usually begin to understand what the roots of the problem are, and start to do some problem solving and unpack the ways in which the person can move forward differently to relieve their stress.
And is it a different prescription, I guess, for lack of a better word, dependent upon, one, how deep they are, and I know you mentioned sometimes it can be clinical, but what their level of stress anxiety is, as well as what the root cause is. So maybe, and I've seen people come to me with different concerns, different issues. And, one of them I've seen, just to give you a couple examples, and especially common in our area, you see keeping up with the Joneses, with the, the neighbors bought this. I want to have this. I see some people that retire, and they retire, it's such an emotional decision to retire, to stop working. They've built up all these assets over their working years. They retire, and because they've, they know, I don't have my paycheck coming in, I have this assets that I'm drawing on, I'm afraid to spend it, and they don't wind up, they live way below their means that they could live in. I see other people that, they're just so infatuated by a net worth number or, a balance sheet, and all they're so focused on is just increasing that number over time. And, no matter what, that's what they're focused on. And then there's, what we've seen recently, which is, this social media, CNBC infatuation, where people are just, tuned to it, to this addictive point where they're making decisions based off of, one direction one day, and then they see something the next day, and, it becomes very obsessive and addictive. But how do you look at each, and these are probably just a couple of root causes. Sure. It could be as simple as someone just worried about losing their job. But how do you, take that root cause and really go to next steps from that?
I see all of these things as well in sessions with my patients, whether they have come to me with a financial issue as their primary concern or not. Like every scenario that you just described is something that I've seen in different patients for different reasons over time, and they're very human things, right? So there's always been this this sort of, like you say, keeping up with the Joneses kind of experience, wherein we, in our society, we are sort of socialized to focus on kind of what we have and how we look, and be competitive with other people in that way, and think, well, if this person has that, then you may feel envy of that and you want that too. Or if that some person has, this person has this type of house or this type of car, well, what does it say about me if I don't have that type of house or type of car? And so one of the things that the dynamic that I describe that as is compare and despair. When you compare yourself to other people in terms of possessions, you will never be satisfied, right? So nothing is good enough, right? If that's your mindset, if your mindset isn't, what kind of a house do I want for myself, for my family, and your decision making is based more on what kind of house is going to impress other people, or what kind of house is going to make me feel like I'm better than somebody else, you're never going to feel satisfied. It's very tempting. It's a very human thing. It's totally, I'm not criticizing anyone who does it. We all do it. We all feel it at times, but it's not the route to happiness. It's not the route to satisfaction, because there's always going to be somebody who has a bigger house, a better car, whatever, and it prevents you from appreciating and enjoying what you do have, right? So it takes you out of the moment until you may live in a lovely house, but then you see someone who has a better one, and suddenly yours looks like a hovel to you, So you lose perspective when you make comparisons, and it's extremely tempting to make these comparisons. And to your point about social media, making these comparisons we're more encouraged and more tempted to do that than ever before because of social media. And the reality that social media is an opportunity for all of us to put our best foot forward and make everyone else feel bad about themselves, right? So like the net effect of social media, research shows, is it makes you feel bad about yourself. And with regard to sort of what you're saying about we have access to so much information so constantly now that some people are trying to live their lives at the speed of light, you know what I mean? And make financial decisions at the speed of light and get whiplash, watching the market go up and down and trying to keep track of it. And I'm sure you have different clients with different goals, but, and I'm not a financial advisor, but that sounds to me like it's not the most intelligent, sound approach to managing your finances, because you've always got to keep hold some larger perspective. And it sounds like what you see happening is that people get so caught up in all the data that we get constantly and go on the emotional roller coaster of the day-to-day up and downs of the market, that they forget to look at the big picture. And then they become, they're living on a roller coaster of stress because of too much information and then addiction to that information.
Yeah, I equate it to, we get hit every day with a fire hose of information, whether it's from the media, whether it's from our colleagues, our friends, and everyone's saying, do this, do that, and sure, some of it may be the right thing to do, but some of it may not. You're always hearing, and like you said, you're seeing it on social media, and you're hearing these stories. This person did this and this person did this, and why am I not doing this? And should I do this? So there's always that fear of missing out that I think is another cause of people's stress that I've seen a lot. And like you said, I've kind of simplified how I portray myself as just help people make better financial decisions by, like you said, looking at look at the big picture of what someone's trying to do, and how does all these little decisions, how can they make the right one for themselves, not for, what someone else is right for someone else, not for what they think is right, but really get down to this is what they should be doing. How does financial stress is just one type of stress. How does it fit into, I'm sure that, a lot of people, it's not the only stress that they have going on.
Mm-hmm.
And do you take kind of the similar approach as I do, is kind of look at the person from a whole and kind of drill down to all the stresses or, all the root causes of what's causing it, whether it is financial or not?
Yeah.
And that's how you can kind of build that picture of what's going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the first things that you learn becoming a clinical psychotherapist is that the presenting problem is never the problem. It's never the real problem. There's always more to the story. Or if the presenting problem is in fact a legitimate problem, it's like the trunk of the tree and it has an elaborate root system underneath it. So like this, whatever the problem is that the person is coming in talking about, it didn't start yesterday and it's not unrelated to everything else in their lives. So I absolutely do the same in my work. And, I think that people who tend to get overwhelmed financially or overwhelmed by anxiety, like there's a reason for that, right? Life is stressful. Okay.
Sure.
So I'm not going to pathologize anybody for feeling anxious about, living life in these times. Being a human being is hard, even when you're not in a global pandemic. And so we all experience anxiety from time to time. But if people come to me because they're overwhelmed with stress, anxiety, depression of some kind, and financial issues are one of the part of the focus of what they want to work on, I'm also interested in seeing that bigger picture of how did this become a problem? Has this always been a problem? And what I find remarkably telling and useful in helping people overcome their reactions to financial stress, right? Because life is stressful, right? We're never going to live stress-free. And so what I help people do isn't to get rid of stress, but learn how to have a different coping mechanisms for their stress. And essentially, if money or financial issues are a significant part of the person's story, then essentially what we're going to work on is how did you develop this relationship to money? Because everybody has a relationship to money. Everyone has a relationship to food. Everyone has a relationship to sex. Everyone has a relationship to like certain aspects of human life that we have to deal with. And I try to ask a lot of questions and see if I can draw a picture of like, okay, what is this person's relationship to money? Why do they think this way about money? Is it the influence of the culture? And so often it has to do with intergenerational factors.
Right.
So if you're, like you mentioned, the retirees who have amassed, worked very hard, amassed an incredible amount of wealth, and then because the transition into retirement, even if you're financially comfortable, is very stressful transition when you're accustomed to being productive, being active, bringing in the paycheck, the money flows in, and then you're in a completely different situation. Those people who feel fearful about the money not continuing to come in have a legitimate concern, right? That's something to get used to when you get into that phase of life. And people who might become overwhelmed by that, say, are people who maybe lived in poverty before they amassed wealth, or they came from a family that lived in poverty, or they survived the Depression, and they have an understandable but exacerbated fear of scarcity. So with that person, I would want to work with them toward understanding how to find a balance between allowing yourself to enjoy what you've earned and not blowing through it so you feel insecure and you have nothing. You know what I mean? Like finding some moderation. And it may take facing some historical information. When we learn, even if our parents don't teach us about money directly, we learn a lot from seeing what our parents do or don't do with money. And in effect,
kids are sponges. Yeah, they're sponges. They pick up on things, pick up on everything. Yeah.
And once I get into asking people, they'll be like, well, how was money? What was your financial situation when you were growing up? How did your parents manage money? Oh, my parents always thought about money. Or, my parents never talked about money. Or, my dad always wanted to spend money. My mother always wanted to save money, or, my parents ignored their money. They didn't manage it at all, and so sometimes people have internalized their parents' approach to money without even realizing it. And sometimes they're in a backlash against what their parents did with money because they saw that it didn't work for their parents. So a lot of what people do around money is very reactive and not mindful.
Yeah. And I'm a big proponent of financial literacy, with kids, because of just what you said. One, it's not being taught to the extent that it probably should in school. So what happens we learn from our parents or our environment or our culture, and that's where we pick up habits. And some of the habits, of course, may be good and some may not. But if it was promoted more or pushed more, earlier, I think it could go a way to, and, there's obviously the quantitative aspect of managing money and but there's also like you mentioned earlier, the relationship with money and how we should look at it, think about it, that I think is just as important as well.
One thing that I will say that I hope that might be like a piece of information that could be useful for any financial challenge that people approach is that financial security does not equal emotional security. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people believe that it does. And people think, well, if I had more money, I would worry less, I'd be happier, everything would be fine, And to your point about people who need to see a number on their balance sheet or in their account, their account balance has to be this number. And when they get to that number, then they raise it to the next number. Like, I'll feel secure. I can relax when I have X number of dollars. And then when they get to that point and they don't feel relaxed, they think they have to raise the number higher. And the reason they don't feel relaxed is because something else is preventing them from being relaxed. Financial security is certainly a better place to be emotionally than financially insecure, right? Financial insecurity is genuinely stressful. However, financial success and financial security do not equate with happiness. And I think people expect it to, and then are very confused when it doesn't. Because what, research has shown that what provides people with the deepest sense of security and happiness over the course of a lifetime is actually relationships.
Yep.
And some people work to the detriment of their relationships so that they can have a certain amount of money that they think is going to make them feel secure, and then it doesn't because they don't feel secure in their relationships. And they don't understand that it's sort of a apples and oranges kind of a situation.
From this conversation, you can tell that there is some crossover with what each of us do, right?
Absolutely.
I'm not a psychotherapist. You're not a financial advisor, but we're both talking to people, one about the numbers and financial planning and decisions, and that crosses the realm between the emotions, the relationship with money, the stress involved in it. So yeah, there is, we're each having those conversations, trying to get at, someone's relationship with money and what they're looking or trying to do.
And what are the ways also, like, in their relationship with money? And I think this is probably something that we both see. What are the things that they're doing that get in their own way? Right? Like, people get in their own way all the time, right? They make a plan with you and then they don't follow up on it, or they follow up a part of it.
See it all the time.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so for me, if I'm working with someone, obviously you're not going to get involved in the psychology of that, but you might, help them with a plan with, I don't know, some skills or strategies for executing their plan. Whereas I might work with them about, like, emotionally, what's really challenging for you about saving? Why do you have to spend it the minute you're in your account, even though you want to save? So I would get into asking those emotional questions, like, well, what does that feel like? Like, there's a part of you that wants to be saving money, and then there's a part of you that can't let the money sit. You gotta do something with it. You know what I mean? And understanding the root of that. And maybe it is using the money to buy something that someone else has that makes them feel more in line with their peers, and they think that's going to make them feel better, and then it never does.
Yeah. What is like and I know the answer is it probably depends on each specific engagement, but what is it? Is it you're meeting, once a week, once every other week, once a month? And how long does it take to really make improvements with someone?
You're absolutely right. It depends on the person and the situation. And people come to therapy for different reasons at different times.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people do come for a very specifically defined issue that they'd like to get some help with. And when they feel like they've resolved that, they're ready to move on. Other people come, they initiate therapy because there's something problematic happening, but then they stay for a continued period of time because they see therapy more as a means to like mental health maintenance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like for some people, it's a little bit like going to the gym.
Yep.
Some people just really, even if they're not in distress, they continue to come because, in my opinion, I agree with this, like what's better than once a week having the opportunity to say anything you want, talk about yourself the entire time. You don't have to talk about the other person, and it's all kept confidential. And you can have this sort of download and support and maybe some analysis of like, okay, what's not working? How could we help you work better? So some people really kind of come more as a way of life. And some people come for something specific that they want to solve. And sometimes the specific problems that need to be solved turn out to be more complex than originally they appear. And as we kind of unpack things and untangle the knot, it's sort of like, ooh, look at this thread in the knot. Like this is a trauma that you experienced that you never really saw that way. So this is going to take some time for healing. But I do work with people generally once a week. Sometimes I'll see people every other week. Generally, if we've been working together for a while and everything's kind of stable and they're feeling pretty good, but they want to stay connected to the relationship and continue to have the outlet of a place to talk and the support of the therapist who knows everything about them, right? Like they don't leave and have to go start with another therapist. And occasionally I'll work with people twice a week if they're really in distress or really in crisis and they need like additional support, or sometimes right at the beginning when people are really in need. 2 times a week is very helpful. But the frequency of weekly at the very least gives you some momentum. Sometimes people want to come every other week to save money or to save time, but it's actually, you kind of get less bang for your buck that way, because what works, and I imagine this is also a bit of a crossover into the work that you do, is that what is helpful to the work is the relationship over time.
Yep.
Right? So you're also building relationships with your clients. And the more you know them and their history and their goals and their aspirations and their, the details, that they could come to you and they don't, you have a relationship with them and there's a lot of value in that relationship. Psychotherapy is the same way. It's, research shows that there's no particular form of therapy that's any more effective than any other kind. Like some kinds of therapy work better for some people than others, but that what is common throughout all forms of psychotherapy is that the relationship is healing. And so having continuity in the relationship by meeting weekly makes that happen.
Yeah, makes sense. Is there a way to measure the effectiveness of the therapy? Aside from someone saying, yeah, I can sleep at night, I'm not thinking about it, or do you like baseline someone and then measure them at a certain point and see, yeah, here are the improvements that we've made?
I do. I don't do that personally in my practice in any scientific way. But I do have, with each person whom I work, I know there are a set of characteristics or a set of circumstances that they're looking to improve in their lives. And sometimes they're vague and sometimes they're very specifically defined. And so I'm always kind of keeping those in mind, and they are hard to measure. But when I see something, someone will say, tell me a story about something that they did at work, right? Like if there's the type of person who works really hard, tends to be underappreciated, doesn't get enough recognition, and doesn't advocate for themselves to get, more compensation, better recognition, even if they're entitled to it. Like somebody who is just kind of being taken advantage of in a job begins to advocate for themselves in the workplace, begins to take actions to make sure they get the recognition, to do the networking that they need to do to be seen more, and get better opportunities for themselves. They'll come in, after a couple of sessions or after a couple of months, and they'll tell me a story about something that happened at work. And I'll say, when you first came in, you couldn't do that. And they'll be like, what? Because it happened so slowly, but in some ways, again, it's not a scientific study, but I'm tracking where we started and where they're going. And I try to point out moments like that. And I'm kind of like, I know this is a little underwhelming because it's just you and I in a room, but like, if you were playing a sport, you'd be winning it right now, and if this were something public, you would get an award, I'm like, you're winning today, so I try to do that. But with regard to measuring the effectiveness of psychotherapy, the advancements in neuroscience over the last decade or so have been incredibly helpful to psychotherapists. And I use information that I read about to share with my patients, particularly regarding trauma and anxiety and how much is now can be observed, neurologically, what happens to people when they're anxious or they have a trauma trigger that literally, like on a PET scan, their frontal lobe, where all their higher thinking takes place, goes dark.
Yeah.
And like the brain stem with the animal thinking is all lit up, So it's like, again, if you're incredibly anxious about money and you're making fear-based decisions, you're not using your most high-level thinking when you're making those decisions, right? So we've got to like dial down the anxiety so you can have access to your frontal lobe again, where all your best thinking is. But in addition to that, there are studies have been done that show that actual unique neural pathways are created over the course of psychotherapy, so that literally their brains are different. Their brains are improved by therapy. So that's been really interesting to learn recently.
Yeah, definitely. So we're just about out of time. Kelly, I'd like to thank you for being on the show. You gave some great insight into how someone can improve their relationship with money, with their finances, reduce stress and anxiety. How best can someone reach out to you?
Well, I have a website, which is my name, Kelly, KellyMoylan.com. So it's my website, kellymoylan.com. And my contact information is there, and information about how I work and who I work with and what my experiences are, all there. So if anybody would like to contact me, that would be the best way to do it, or find out more. And if I can be helpful, I'd be happy to. And I really enjoy talking with you. I think a lot of times people don't talk about money, or don't want to talk about money, or think it's not okay to talk about money, or they should just have it figured out already. So, which is not the case. I think everybody needs help with it, and there's a lot of stress and challenges around it. So thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll link to all that in the show notes.
Great.
And thanks again. And thank you everyone for tuning in to today's episode.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.